They've made billions. Fossil fuel company profits pushed to record levels, while tens of thousands of households are pushed into poverty. Energy bills have risen so perilously high because of the soaring cost of the same thing that's driven the climate emergency, oil and gas. Take them away and you deal with two crises at once. Glossy corporate videos say they're on the job.
We are working as a partner for sustainable, economy-wide change.
But adverts are one thing, the numbers tell a different story. We've taken a look at the accounts of four of Europe's biggest oil and gas companies, BP, Shell, TotalEnergies and Equinor. In the first 6 months of this year, they made just over £74 billion in pre-tax profits. In the same period, our analysis found they reinvested £3.4 billion in renewable and low-carbon energy, equivalent to just 5% of those bumper profits. Climate campaigners say it's only renewables that can ease the triple crises of cost of living, energy and climate.
What this shows is that their investment in renewables is a vanishingly small proportion of their overall investment, which is still very much focused on oil and gas. In the UK, we don't have any control, no matter how much oil and gas we produce domestically, over the price that we pay for it. And ultimately, we are in an energy affordability crisis. What is clear is that renewables are 4 times cheaper than gas at the moment, and we have abundant untapped reserves of renewables in the UK that we should be exploiting.
Of course, profits aren't always reinvested into new projects. And for all 4 companies we looked at, renewable investments are increasing. Here we see low carbon cash rising as a proportion of their total investment. But just look at the numbers. At best, that's only 25%. The vast majority of the rest is still going on oil and gas. Offshore Energies UK, until months ago Oil and Gas UK, represents the industry. Do you think that investing an equivalent of 5% of pre-tax profits is acceptable?
The amount of investment that is made will, that will change over time. I would expect that share to go up, and by 2030.
But that's what's happening this year.
Higher.
Is it acceptable now?
Well, we have to look at the long term in terms of energy investment.
In response to our findings, all 4 companies told Channel 4 News that investments come in cycles which can vary, and that they are increasing their investment in renewables. By 2025, TotalEnergies says a quarter of its annual investment will be in renewables. By 2030, BP plans low-carbon investments of up to $5 billion. Shell plans to invest up to $25 billion in the UK, over 3/4 of it in low-carbon energy, and Equinor aims for more than half of its investment to be in renewables and low-carbon. The UK has decarbonised its energy system more than many countries. Even today, Scotland's largest offshore wind farm came online, jointly operated by TotalEnergies. But not all the company profits we analysed were made in the UK, nor all the investments. The majority of Equinor's profits this year came from Norway, where it pays 78% tax on its earnings. And taxes are key in all this, which makes oil and gas profits extremely political. Despite fears it would deter investment, the government has introduced a windfall tax on energy producers' profits. But at the same time, a clause in that tax incentivises more investment in North Sea oil and gas over renewables. Equinor's Rosebank and Shell's Jackdaw are 2 major oil and gas fields benefiting. Meanwhile, the cost of our reliance on fossil fuels keeps racking up, a cost to the climate and now people's wallets too. The government says more energy security is needed for the future, but more renewables or more gas? Just how we secure that future, or what security even looks like, seems still up in the air.
Well, there are, of course, fears around energy supply and security this winter and an urgent need to be ready for what might come. And that need to be prepared was underlined by the National Grid, confirming that it had doubled its annual emergency gas shortage drill from 2 days to 4 days. What the new Prime Minister will do to stave off an energy crisis is something many are waiting to hear. Our reporter Amelia Jen is in Birmingham, where the latest Conservative Party hustings is taking place. Amelia.
Well, Birmingham is the stage tonight for one of the final showdowns between the Conservative leadership candidates Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. The hustings just begun in the building behind me. There are only 2 more to go, and the next PM will be in Downing Street in about 2 weeks' time. with dire warnings about energy costs ringing in their ears, no doubt. Perhaps the starkest warning yet came from EDF today, the energy giant, saying that without government intervention, half of Britain's households could be plunged into fuel poverty. Now, what's interesting at this point of the campaign is the way that energy suppliers have been weighing in, coming up with their own ideas for government policy to help consumers. But this isn't just about consumers, it's about businesses too, and there are real concerns about how they might fare. I understand that the National Grid has been in touch with energy-intensive firms, so for example, steel makers, glass makers, to check that they're ready for the worst-case scenario. Now that would see them perhaps winding down their gas supplies with very, very short notice. And as you say, Kathy, they've lengthened their gas shortage drill from 2 to 4 days. So these are all huge policy decisions that Boris Johnson's government are leaving to the next PM, whoever that might be. Like so many across the UK, Diane is worried about how she'll make ends meet this winter.
Yeah.
Her daughter Lauren has quadriplegic cerebral palsy, their house fitted with electrical equipment they just can't do without.
She'll come through the house and she's hoisted by a ceiling hoist from here out of her wheelchair onto the bed. That has to be remained on charge all the time. She's tube fed or 24/7, so she has to have her pump, which has 2 pumps. They have to be fully charged.
Do you feel like anyone's in control at the moment? Do you feel like you can get help? Help is on the way?
No, not at all. I don't think so. I think it's free falling. I think it's just really, I think it's going down the pan, to be honest with you. And it's very scary, it's very frightening. I try not to dwell too much on all the sad things because it doesn't make Lauren's life any better.
According to Friends of the Earth, families in Birmingham are among the most vulnerable in the UK when it comes to spiralling energy costs, and their anxieties will only be compounded further with predictions of a massive hike in the energy price cap on Friday. Some analysts say it could be higher than £3,500 and by April £6,500. Today, energy giant EDF said the government's support for those struggling with bills was much too low to prevent what they called the catastrophic winter ahead, the inevitable and perhaps insurmountable legacy for whoever takes the helm of the Conservative Party.
For 2 groups of people, for pensioners and for those on the lowest incomes, I will make sure that they get direct extra financial support over the autumn and winter to help them with those bills, because I know this is the #1 concern people have.
The front-runner Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has hinted at direct help for the hard-pressed, but with little detail on what form that might take.
What I'm not about is a short-term sticking plaster. I'm about dealing with the serious issues of energy supply and making sure, as the United Kingdom, we're resilient in energy.
Energy prices started rising sharply when the economy rebooted after the pandemic, and further still after Russia's invasion of Ukraine cut global supplies. Wholesale gas is now so expensive it's caused energy suppliers to collapse.
Without government intervention, prices of energy will be increased for sure. People will have less money to spend on food. Energy poverty will be deepened, and that will lead to some unwanted social and probably political consequences.
For Diane and her family, it's the unknown that's the hardest.
I mean, we were only saying the other day, we had some candles on and my husband said, this is probably what we'll be back to again. And I said, oh God, no way, and surely not. But that's how he's thinking about things, in the worst case scenario. And who knows, who's to say that it wouldn't go back to that? You're looking at your wallpaper again.
Downing Street has said there's no need for concern, that households and businesses can be confident of winter supplies. At what price is as yet unknown.
Well, earlier I spoke to Alistair Phillips-Davies, the chief executive of energy company SSE, which has just built Scotland's largest offshore wind farm we heard about earlier. I began by asking him how much more help the government would have to give householders to help with rising bills.
I think it's almost certain that we will need to see more done. But as we set out last weekend, I think there are things that can be done that essentially can defer the costs or smooth those costs out. They can provide benefits to industry in the longer term in terms of reducing cost of capital for building more and more of the sort of generation plant that we need to get us out of this crisis in the medium term, and it can also smooth out costs or significantly reduce costs in the short term for consumers.
I wonder why you think that taxpayers should subsidise your company effectively. When you reported this year a 44% jump in pre-tax profits to £3.5 billion, a lot of people might think, well, you should be doing a little bit more financially to help the worst off.
We're not asking the taxpayer to subsidise what's going on. It's a bit like a mortgage. Government can seek to smooth out what they do for bill payers by backing something now and then recovering that money later. Companies like ours are investing billions, if not tens of billions of pounds in infrastructure, which is going to yield far lower prices in the future, and which government can access and bring forward today. So that's the basis on which we've done it, is take access to the £24 billion that we've committed to spend this decade. I'd also note we're spending far more than the profits we're making as well going forward. We're cutting our dividends, we're selling non-core businesses just to fund the sort of infrastructure that's needed to get costs down to where we are.
Your partner in Scotland's largest offshore wind farm, Total Energies, is one of 4 oil and gas companies that we're revealing today. Between them, made £74 billion in pre-tax profits in the first 6 months of this year. And together, they invested just 5% of those profits. Would you urge your partner, Total Energies, to make a bigger share of investments?
We'd encourage everybody who's able to in the energy sector, and particularly in the renewables energy sector, to come forward and to make bigger and bolder investments where they're able to. At the end of the day, what they decide to do is up to them.
Government is clearly scrutinising whether they can extend the windfall tax still further, perhaps into electricity generation. Are you concerned about that?
I think windfall taxes are for government to decide on. It's not something that I'm particularly concerned about. We're getting on with investing. That's the critical thing that we need to do. At the end of the day, they'll decide what they want to do. I would note, though, not having stable fiscal frameworks, and taxes are clearly part of that, can deter investment, and that's exactly what this country needs at the moment.
Would you scale down your investment plans if you were hit with a windfall tax yourself?
I think if circumstances change, you always have to think about what's going on. We obviously take decisions on projects based on post-tax returns. So if things do change, we might have to reconsider what we're doing.
You say you've trimmed your dividends, but your personal pay package in total leapt by 47% to £4.5 million this year. It's quite hard to defend that, isn't it?
In terms of pay, I don't set my pay. It's set by an independent board of people. It's fully transparent and has been for the entire time I've been a director of this company. And I'm obviously clearly held accountable for a whole set of things that I have to deliver year in, year out. And these are long-term measures.
Do you not feel at all embarrassed getting paid millions of pounds when householders up and down the country are struggling to feed themselves and heat their homes?
As I've said, as regards my pay, I don't set my pay. It's very transparent what I get paid, unlike many people.
Is it transparently excessive, though?
It's published, unlike many people's pay, it's published every year. You can see what's there. I'm accountable for delivering the things we are. Do
you think if people can't pay their energy bills this winter and they refuse to pay, should they be shown lenience?
As a company, whenever we've looked after customers, we've always been very focused on trying to make sure that we did the right thing, having hardship funds, doing our best to keep bills down as much as possible.
Are you increasing your hardship fund, though?
We've certainly announced plans in Ireland this year where we've substantially increased the amount of money that we've made available to customers. Yes.
And just finally, what are your thoughts about the possibility of blackouts this winter? Is that something that keeps you awake at night?
As an infrastructure company, we obviously want to make sure that we provide smooth, continuous supplies of power and gas and energy to people, and going around all the various companies like ours to make sure that we're ready and prepared to deliver what they need to. And I've not heard anybody talk about those things. And indeed, I think in Grid's latest assessment, they thought this winter would be fine, basically.
Alistair Phillips-Davies, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon has met with energy companies to discuss how to tackle the soaring costs of heating our homes. The First Minister has talked about a looming disaster already unfolding and said the energy price cap rise should not go ahead. Our Scotland correspondent joins me from Edinburgh now. Kieran.
Cathy, Nicola Sturgeon sat down here today with several big energy companies, Scottish Power, E.ON and Centrica, which owns British Gas, among them. And the First Minister says they came to a consensus that the energy price cap, set to reach astronomical levels in October, should be frozen before that at the current rate. Nicola Sturgeon says it should be frozen for 2 years, and that goes further than the 6-month freeze that Labour are proposing. It goes way further than current plans that the UK government has, or the candidate to be next Prime Minister. But it would be costly. Scottish Power put forward a proposal for a 2-year freeze that would cost taxpayers ultimately £100 billion. Well, earlier I asked Nicola Sturgeon about those big profits that energy companies and oil companies have been making. I asked her about challenging companies making big profits, including some of those sat across from her today. But first, I asked her about that plan for a £100 billion energy price cap freeze.
That is the kind of intervention that is needed, effectively freezing energy costs right now, and then the costs of that, the difference between the cost of energy and the price that's been charged to customers is paid back over a much longer period of time. That is needed to avoid a looming humanitarian disaster. It will also help to bear down on inflation, which is still spiralling out of control.
Because you've also said that nationalising energy companies should be on the table for the UK government. Why is that a good idea, do you think?
So first and foremost, we need to protect consumers, individuals and businesses from this spiralling cost of energy. And then there has to be a discussion about how the cost of that is paid over a period of time. Public stakes in energy companies may be one of them. I'm not saying that that is definitely what should happen, but given the scale and the nature of this crisis, all options should be considered.
You could have a publicly owned energy company in Scotland right now if you had delivered the promise that you made to create one. Would that have made things slightly easier for Scottish consumers if you delivered that promise?
Let me make 2 points, and I think it is a fair question and a fair area of scrutiny. Firstly, the reasons we haven't made progress on that are largely impacted through COVID over the last couple of years, and people can make a judgment about whether that is reasonable or not, but all of the efforts of government for much of the last 2.5 years have gone into focusing on the COVID pandemic. To go to the second part of your question, I think publicly owned energy companies would be a good thing, but they would still be purchasing energy at the higher wholesale price, so it would be wrong to say it would have solved the crisis that we are currently dealing with.
Maybe mitigated it slightly, because what you said in 2017 was the idea at its heart is simple: no shareholders to worry about, no corporate bonuses to consider. And you sat around the table today with Centrica that paid out £59 million to shareholders in the first half of this year.
I thought it was a good thing to do. I'm not shying away from the fact that for the reasons I've set out, we haven't progressed in the way that we had intended to, but I equally think it is just fundamentally wrong to say that had we done so, the crisis would have been taken away or even mitigated to a significant extent, given the scale of the price increases driven by wholesale prices that we're dealing with right now.
Can I ask you about a story that we have on Channel 4 News tonight, which is that 4 big oil giants made £74 billion in profits in the first half of this year. They only reinvested 5% of that in renewables and low-carbon energy. Is that acceptable? Is it moral?
No, I don't think it is acceptable, and I would say this directly to companies such as the ones that you are citing right now. All have an obligation, and I think the obligation on all of us to deal with the climate emergency is a moral one, to invest more in renewable alternatives, and I would certainly hope to see all of these big oil and gas companies do much more in that vein.
And just finally, when you had the opportunity today to look Centrica in the eye, who have paid out £59 million to shareholders, who have made £1.3 billion in profits at the start of this year, did you challenge them? Did you tell them it wasn't acceptable?
What we were working on today was trying to bring everybody together to do more to help, and people can decide how best to approach meetings like that. My view is that it's better to be constructive. Centrica and other companies know my view on the energy market issues and on profits and on the contribution they should be making in terms of taxation.
First Minister, thank you very much.